Hello there everyone, how you doing today? I hope you're all well. Today I'm reading some creepypastas and horror stories from r/nosleep. If you enjoy, remember to like the video and leave a hype on it if you got that available to you, so we may feed the almighty Steve. Now without further ado, let's get started, shall we? My friend died in a horrible prank. I wish I never learned what went wrong. The worst deaths, in my opinion, are accidental. I read last week about a mother who rolled onto her newborn baby and suffocated it. Every year, toddlers die from being left in hot cars. And then you hear stories of kids playing games, like one boy who hid in an unplugged freezer and suffocated to death during hide-and-seek. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being the person responsible in any of these situations? To me, this is so much more terrifying than the prospect of the paranormal. I would much rather be haunted by a ghost than by guilt over unintentionally hurting someone. My husband, Wade, is the opposite. He's unbothered by accidents, but petrified of horror movies about demons or vengeful ghosts. But as I told him, none of these things are real, so why be scared? He counters that accidents are without malice, therefore not as scary as murderous ghosts that might be real. I guess he has a point. About the lack of malice, not about the ghosts that might be real. I know they're not, because if they were, my best friend would definitely be haunting me. I guess in some ways she is. You see, whenever I read about a prank going wrong, I start breathing for a moment. I am choked by guilt. After all these years, I still don't know if it was my fault. I was never charged, and my friends insist I need to stop blaming myself. But how can I? How can I move on not knowing if it's because of me? Rosa got into the suitcase on her own. Lakeisha and I helped her. We were all drunk, giggling. She was supposed to surprise Ballin. She had a huge crush on him. Let me back up. Let me try to explain. We were at a party. Our friend group had been together for years, and we rented out the lodge for me, my husband, Wade, who back then was just my crush, his buddies Bolin and Tucker and JB, and the girls who were my besties, Lakeisha, Rosa, and Kay. There were also some other friends who stopped by who we'd met earlier in the day, while hiking. I can't remember their names anymore. What I do remember is that we all had a lot to drink. And Rosa, well, she was in her flirty phase. Rosa was my best friend, but she wasn't perfect. She was like a butterfly who sips from every flower, a real heartbreaker, beautiful and passionate. I was a little bit jealous of the attention she had, and also kind of in awe of her. Whoever she was with fell hard, like she was the love of their life. But she never committed. She'd been on again, off again with JB, and then seduced Wade, which was kind of bitchy because she knew I had a crush on him. She'd even flirted with bisexuality with Kay. Now her eyes were on Bolin. I forget whose idea it was for her to hide in the suitcase, mine or hers. All the luggage was in the basement because that's where the boys had put it, or where we'd arrived on the lodge. Lakeisha said something like, Bolin's suitcase is big enough to hide a body, and that's when Rosa or me had the idea she'd hide in it. And Rosa decided to spice up the prank by wearing lingerie. When Bolin took the suitcase up to his room and opened it, he would find a sexy surprise. We were stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. None of us had good judgment, especially since we were tipsy. Once Rosa squeezed inside, whining about her hair getting caught in the zipper. Lakeisha and I went to go badger the boys to bring everyone's bags to their room. I remember Bolin delivered mine. I was staying outside in a tent with Kay. The lodge didn't have enough bedrooms for everybody, and we wanted to sleep under the stars. Kay had no idea about the prank and was confused when I kept urging Bolin to go inside and check his bag. After he left, I told her about Rosa, and because Kay was actually sober, she told me to make sure Rosa wasn't stuck in there. So I decided to make sure the suitcase wasn't still at the bottom of the stairs. At least I think I did, but I was drunk. While all of us were sitting outside watching fireworks later, I noticed Bolin missing and asked Wade where he went. Bolin had gone up to his room early. Since he hadn't come back, Lakeisha and I assumed Rosa was in there with him, and that her lingerie stunt had worked. In fact, Lakeisha and I were whispering about it all evening, quietly, so not to make any of the boys jealous. In the morning, when Bolin came down, Lakeisha and I asked him about last night, all smirks. He looked clueless. Then Lakeisha asked where Rose was, and he was still clueless. But what about his suitcase? Hadn't he opened it? He said someone had shoved all his clothes into a closet in a pile. He wasn't sure why. He assumed he was being pranked or something, and he hadn't seen his suitcase. "So you never opened it?" asked Lakeisha. Dread bloomed in my belly. Oh God, oh God, oh God! Lakeisha was telling him how we'd taken off the clothes off Rosa and had hidden inside, hoping to surprise him in her lingerie, and Bolin blushed and said he was gay. He was gay, but his coming out to us hardly even registered, because where was Rosa? None of us knew. We quickly went to wake everyone else up, hoping someone had seen her last night. Oh God, oh God, oh God! Didn't I check? I swear I checked. Prayers ran through my head, but I was drunk. I wasn't sure if I really had. I went downstairs to the basement, and there was the suitcase still tucked away at the bottom of the stairs. It was exactly where we'd left it when we zipped Rosa inside the night before. Nobody wanted to open the suitcase. The boys argued about who left it there. JB said he'd lifted it but noticed how heavy it was and asked someone else to take it. Each of them had thought another of the guys was going to grab it. Bolin didn't think to check because he found his clothes piled in the closet. I'm ashamed to say I went outside when Lakeisha reached for the zipper. Wade came out and joined me. He told me dead bodies, gore, things like that scared him. While the others checked the contents of the suitcase, Wade and I sat outside. We heard the gasps and whispers of, "Oh, God." His fingers gripped mine tightly. I then put my head in my hands and sobbed. She had suffocated, of course, but it had taken a long time. The police wondered why none of us had heard her gasping for help, but Kay sheepishly told them about the fireworks. A prank gone wrong, authorities ruled. My friends said then, and still say now, that ultimately Rosa was the one most responsible for her own misfortune. That she'd made her own decisions, that all of us were a little guilty, but none of us was wholly responsible for a tragic accident. But it was my hand that closed the zipper. I've lain in bed, thinking about her gasping for air. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't we hear any muffled shouts? I imagine her squeezed in the darkness while her pleas for help go unanswered, and I can't breathe. But the real reason I'm writing this is because this morning I saw a story in the news about a woman in her underwear found strangled on the beach. My husband watched away from the reporting, and when I asked why, he looked surprised and said he thought it might trigger me. Why? I asked. It wasn't a prank. I thought it might remind you of Rosa, the lingerie. I suppose that aspect was similar. To be honest, the part of the tragedy had never really stuck with me as much. But now that I think about it, we all stopped talking about her after her death. How her death was only a blip in the news. No details were released. In our friend group, Rosa's death became a taboo subject. Almost like she'd never been with us at all. We all silently agreed to forget her. But the more I think on that report on the news, the more I'm getting that feeling from that day. The top of the stairs feeling. Like I'm looking down and seeing something I don't want to see. The oh God, oh God, oh God sense of impending dread. And I am about to be sick. because Wade dated her too, and I loved her. And more certain, I looked down the stairs before the fireworks, and there was no suitcase there. And now I'm wondering, if Wade never saw what was in the suitcase, never picked it up or opened it or moved it, how did he know she was in her lingerie when she died? That is the end of story number 1. Taking a break between the stories to remind you, if you have any stories you want me to read, send it to jrhoffman2806@outlook.com, and I'd be happy to read them here for you. Now, let's keep going, shall we? The warehouse I work at won't tell us what's in the containers. Now I know why. I needed a job, as I could barely afford rent. I just walked out of a bar mid-job shift a few days before. My landlord mentioned he knew a place that was hiring. He was a strange guy, but to say the least, but he seemed sincere. "So, you can get me something that starts straight away?" I asked. "Yeah, they'll take you on pretty quick. They're always getting new people. You know how to drive a forklift, though. Right, kid?" I said. I didn't, but I was desperate, I thought. How hard can it be? "Yeah, I can drive one." "Is this a warehouse job, then? Is it nearby?" I asked. "Yeah, it's not too far from here. I'll give them all a call and let them know if they got some fresh meat." He waddled off and went back to the apartment. "Well, that was easy," I said out loud. I was pretty happy. I just got a job. I decided to celebrate and asked my friends if they wanted to go out to the bars tonight. The next day, my landlord knocked on my door at 5 a.m. I'd only gotten home a couple hours prior. I opened the door in my underwear. "Yeah, what's up?" I muttered, my mouth still dehydrated, dry as a desert sand. "You start today, kid. Get dressed and head down there. Here's the address. I wrote it down on a piece of paper." He commanded in a deadly serious tone. Before I had a chance to speak, he handed me the note and stormed off. He had scribbled the address on a torn piece of dirty magazine. Didn't surprise me at all. I got dressed and grabbed the bus to the nearest stop to the address he gave me. It was in a shady part of town. A really shady part of town. I'd actually avoided going this way my entire time living here. For the first time for everything, I suppose. I came to the address, and it was a warehouse. It looked old and abandoned. I banged on the door, and to my surprise, it opened swiftly. A tall, dark, handsome man in a designer suit stood before me. Charlie, isn't it? Your friend has told us you can fill in on a forklift position. You're right on time, too. Come on in, son," the man said. "Yeah, that's me." I followed him inside and saw the warehouse was awfully clean. Too clean. I could practically see my reflection in the floor. I could see multiple cleaners scrubbing various areas of the small warehouse. They were cleaning full hazmat-looking suits. It looked something out of Chernobyl. He guided me to the forklift and stared at me. "Here you go," he said in a joyful manner. Do I not need to, sign any paperwork or anything? Don't I need a high-vis or something, too?" I said with a shaky voice. I was terrible at faking anything. "Nope, we trust you. You're all good to go," he said with a big grin. This forklift, it's kind of different to what I'm used to. Is there a manual or something?" I said, with a tremor in my voice. There was no way I could pull him off. "Different? This is a standard model. I wonder what you're used to then." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I was so embarrassed and actually kind of scared too. Before I could spew any more BS, he grabbed a worker walking by. "Dean, show Charlie how we use the forklifts. He's not used to this model." The man, my new boss now, walked off in a hurry. Dean, my co-worker, spent the next 30 minutes showing me how to use the forklift. He could tell I'd never touched one in my life, but didn't seem to care. Dean was an odd-looking guy. Straightforward and nice enough, but definitely a dark horse. His face was covered in scars. They looked like cat scratches. He was missing an ear and an eye, but didn't bother wearing an eye patch. His head was shaven, and he had a long red beard that hadn't seen a wash or a trim in years. I was surprised how easily I took to the job.
They had a few position drivers who unloaded the trucks, drivers who put away the containers, drivers who took containers from the trucks that were leaving, and drivers who unloaded the trucks that were leaving. To start me off, they put me on taking the containers from the unloaded trucks and putting the containers away. The containers were about 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide, like a really small elevator. They were a thick iron, not like regular wooden crates. They had an opening door on them which looked really heavily padlocked. As I was moving the containers in the forklift, well, just about doing so without crashing, I could hear rumbling and thudding against the containers. Whatever was in there was moving. I saw the man from earlier walking around and waved at him to get his attention. He walked over and said, "How's it going, son?" "It's good, thank. What the heck is in these containers? I'm worried I'm gonna drop them if whatever's in there keeps rocking about. Hope I'm not breaking anything." Part of your paperless verbal contract is to respect our client's confidentiality. We don't open the containers. Each and every container has a unique barcode. We simply receive shipments, store the containers for a short amount of time, and then ship them back out, he said in a stern yet friendly tone. "Ah, okay. Alright then. About my contract, how much does this job pay? And what are my hours?" I asked nervously. "Your hours are from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. You'll be paid $333 a day at the end of each shift in cash." He said that with the same grin. "Okay, thanks, I'll get to work now," I said to him. 333 euros a day? That is so much money. I'm going to be rich doing this job. What a weird amount, though. In cash? Who pays in cash? 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. is going to be brutal, though, I thought to myself. I had stopped paying attention to the container on my forklift, and as I tried to move it up higher to fit on the stack, my finger slipped and I pressed the wrong button by mistake. The prongs of the forklift shuddered, and the container came crashing down. As part of the container burst open, I heard a quick, excruciating scream, and then nothing. The scream came from inside the container. The entire team stopped what they were doing and rushed over. The cleaners immediately began spraying and cleaning up the container like flies swarming a corpse. As I looked around, panicking like crazy, I looked back to the container. There was blood pooling by the now busted container door. A security guard grabbed me by my throat and pulled me out of the forklift. He shoved me to the ground and put a knee to my head, holding me down in place. The tall man in the designer suit rushed over to me and told the security guard everything was all right for now. "It's okay, son. Accidents happen. It's only your first day here. How about we take a lunch break while the team sorts out this little accident?" "What was in there?" I screamed. The rest of the warehouse looked at me like I just pulled out a grenade. "Now, what did I say about that, Charlie?" he said to me in a calm but concerned tone. "I thought it was just weapons or something in there. That was blood. Why is there blood in there? Are there animals in there?" He didn't answer my questions. The security guard picked me up to my feet and escorted me to a break room. The room was small. It had a few chairs around the table in the middle of the room. There were some children's toys in the corner of the room. They looked out of place. I guess the boss brings his kid to work sometimes. We had a long talk. Well, I didn't really say anything. He told me how lucky I am to have this opportunity, and that they're doing a good thing here. He preached about company values and client satisfaction. He said to me that he actually appreciated how interested I am in the work, and that there may be another position within the organization I can fulfill. He said that actually since my little incident, a slot's just been open for a brand new exciting opportunity. I'm in the break room now. He's gone, but he says he'll be back soon and show me what's inside the containers, like, to put my mind at ease. I guess this new job isn't so bad after all. My landlord, Mr. Graves, is a great guy for getting me this job. I will let you know how I get on.
I never really knew my paternal great aunt Annette. My family are, for the most part, quite tight-knit, and my mom's and dad's sides get on great together. But she was the exception. Her life was one of solitude, and that was the way she liked it. She'd never married or had children of her own. I knew that she was an avid birdwatcher because my dad mentioned it once or twice. She only ever left it in her house to do her weekly shopping, and that was about it. I'd been to her house only once or twice, I'd say, and that was when I was a very young child. I remembered it smelling like mold, and I remember thinking there was nowhere near as nice to me as her sister, my grandmother, was. When she died a few years back, most of the family went to her funeral, but I remember thinking that they seemed to be mourning the idea of her more than they were actually mourning her. Dad had passed away by then, and so had Grandma, so I was her only remaining family, and that's why it fell to my mom and I to settle her will. Everything of any financial value was taken care of, and what remained was kept in cardboard boxes, collecting dust in our respective homes. Recently, my mom's been organizing some renovations for her house, and she just asked if I'd give her a hand clearing out all the old junk in her basement. What I discovered down there, and what that led me to, has been haunting me ever since. I just need to get it out of here somewhere. When I went over to get the job done, I had the day off work, but my mom did not. She'd given me a spare key the day before so I could get going sooner rather than later, and have everything ready by the time she was home. For 2 hours or so, I was just hauling up broken kitchen appliances, old toys of mine, that sort of thing, deciding what could be thrown in the trash right away, and what should be there should be left for Mom to consult. I didn't mind the job at all. There was a pleasant nostalgia to a lot of the things I was unearthing down there. Once I'd all but finished, I came to a small cardboard box sitting in the far corner of the basement that had my great-aunt's name on it in Sharpie. I took it upstairs like I'd done with all the other boxes, satisfied that the job was done. Since I had nothing to do now other than wait for Mom to arrive, I figured I'd have a look inside since it's been quite a while since I ever thought of Annette. The box had felt packed full when I was carrying it, so I was expecting a lot of random knickknacks, but instead all that was in there was a very thick photo album and the title Family. The thought of poring over old, possibly new-to-me family photographs filled me with a sentimental kind of excitement, though I did think to myself absently that it was more than a little surprising Annette seemingly had so many family photographs, given how reclusive she was in life. I opened the album, and that's where things started to get odd. Really, really odd. For a start, I'd never seen any of those photos before, not a single one. They were all of my family gatherings. Holidays, birthdays, normal stuff. But in every single photo, one person is always missing. Not blurred or out of frame, mind you, but simply absent. An empty space between two people where a third should be. Arms draped around invisible shoulders. A spot at a dining table with a plate of food, steaming but nobody sitting beside it. My first thought was that maybe Annette had a specific grudge against someone in the family, and she'd gotten some super skilled photoshopper to erase them from the album. It was hard to imagine her knowing what Photoshop even was, but it was the only explanation I could come up with. The trouble with that, though, was that I was pretty certain I could see everyone in our immediate family at least a few times throughout the pictures. When Mom arrived, I asked her what she thought. She told me it must be her own cousin, that she'd always thought Annette didn't approve of him on account of him being gay. Sure, I'd met my mom's cousin Anthony a few times, but would he really have been in the original version of every single one of these photos? Mom seemed very adamant on her theory, so I didn't challenge her on it. I dropped the subject since we still had all the other stuff from the basement to sift through. But it never left the back of my head. Something just wasn't right about it at all. Once we sorted everything into a keep and dump pile, Mom invited me to stay for dinner, which I would never say no to. Before I said goodbye, I asked her if I could take the album for a little while. I made up some reason about wanting to copy some of the photos or something. She didn't mind at all. Over the next few days, I continued to puzzle over the album. I asked other people in the family what they thought about it. However, everyone I asked had contradictory, fiercely held memories about who it was, some making even less sense than others. My Aunt Emma insisted it was her Uncle Jeffrey. My third cousin Nathan swore it was one of his exes. A few people claimed it was various in-laws. They all remembered the events of most in the photos vividly, but no two people I asked believed it was the same person missing from the mall. I noticed something else around then, too. In the majority of the photos where I appeared as a child, I looked terrified, staring directly at the empty space where a person should be. This whole thing was starting to get me more than I'd like to admit. I was losing sleep over it, and when I did sleep, I kept having the same dream, where it's a family picnic, and I'm playing catch with a smiling man whose upper face is a blur of light. One night I jolted awake with a name on my lips. Arnold. But there's nobody in my family called Arnold. I was determined to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to have a look in my own basement, to see if I had anything else belonging to Annette sitting around. After spending what felt like an age searching through boxes of Christmas decorations, buckets of paint, and gardening tools, I finally landed on a similar box with Annette's name on it, hidden behind my broken mini-fridge. When I opened the cardboard box, a pungent smell of chewing tobacco and pond scum exploded out at me. I have no idea how an odor like that could have stewed in that box for years and still be so strong. All I could see in the box were layers of bubble wrap, and what's worse is I knew that smell. Smelling it now, I was hit by a flood of memories that I've tried for a long, long time to bury. This was back when I was about 10 years old. My best friend at the time was a kid called Lucas. I don't have any contact with him these days. His family moved to Canada less than a year after this time. But anyway, something we used to do, occupy ourselves over the summer, was play ding-dong ditch around the neighborhood. It was a ton of fun for us to take turns hiding behind trees and cars, while the other knocked on someone's door and then ran. And my parents were well liked in the area, so if I did get caught, people tended to just laugh it off and tell me not to do it again. Lucas lived past the outskirts of our town, though, through down past some country roads, so we couldn't really do it over there. Usually my parents trusted me enough to let me walk over myself if I wanted to hang out there. There was only one house I'd pass on the way, and the front yard always seemed to emanate that putrid stench, chewing tobacco and pond scum. It was a pretty normal-looking house, all things considered, but something about it just always put us on edge. There was never a vehicle parked in its driveway. One day, Lucas and I had stolen one of his dad's beers and split it, so we were feeling like real daredevils. That's right, Lucas dared me to play ding-dong ditch at that house. I told him it would be that piece of cake. He hid on the left side of the house while I swaggered up to the door. Almost as soon as I knocked the door, a man opened it. It was as though he's been waiting there, knowing it was coming. The man looked normal enough, bald and with a tight gray beard, but his eyes just didn't look right. Big and dark, like that of an animal. He was wearing a suit which struck me as odd too, and his lips were bleeding in a few places. I think he'd bitten into them. I panicked to think of a good reason for knocking while he just stared at me. "It's too late to pick another door," he said in a deranged-sounding voice. Looking behind him, I could see how strange the house was on the inside. The man had lights turned off, but I could see a grandfather clock behind him that was missing its arms. The floorboards were painted in a strange shade of blue, and I could hear music playing from somewhere deeper inside. "Reelin' in the Years" by Steely Dan. I only ever recognized it because it was one of my dad's favorites. What? I stammered. "Yeah," he said, smiling fervently. "You'd go up to their door and knock on it. Knock, knock, knock. Just like that. Knock, knock, knock. Let me in. He mined, knocking on a door by rapping his cold knuckles on my forehead lightly. I didn't like that one bit. Then, as my eyes adjusted more to the darkness, the insides of the house, I realized that there was a swarm of buzzing bees in there. I've got no idea why they weren't trying to get back outside. It was all just too weird. I wanted to leave. "You've been a nosy boy," the man whispered, still smiling. "A bad, nosy, little naughty nosy boy." "I'm sorry," I tried to say, but the man instantly lost his smile and leant forward, screaming straight into my face like a wild animal, hurling spit at me. His breath reeked of cough syrup like he'd been drinking it by the bottle, and I've never been more scared in my life. He stopped screaming as instantaneously as he'd started, and went back to staring at me while I shook in fear. One of the bees landed on his face and crawled right up his nostril. He didn't even seem to notice. "You won't tell anyone what you saw," he said quietly. It wasn't a question, because if you do, I'll creep into your home late at night when you're asleep and slit your throat. That was too much. I think I pissed myself. That was when the man slammed the door shut, and I ran away for my life. Lucas seemed to have already done so, and I didn't blame him. I ran all the way home. Even at that age, I had enough sense to know it was always better to tell someone when this serious, so I told my dad what happened. I've never seen him look so angry and scared at the same time. He asked me what house it was, and he called the police to tell them that a meth addict had threatened to kill his son. Later, we were informed that the house was between owners at the time. There shouldn't have been anyone there. The police continued to patrol the area for a while, but they never found that man, and I never once again played Ding Dong Ditch. Going back to Annette's box, I pulled out the bubble wrap only to find a few things in there. A VHS tape, a singular photograph, a pair of binoculars, and a notepad with a watercolor of a robin on its collar. I figured it must have been related to bird watching, and I opened the notepad expecting to see a list of birds she'd seen on different dates, but not at all. On every page there were sketches of complex geometric patterns and shapes. I was baffled. Then I noticed something strange about the binoculars too. I peered into them to confirm my suspicions. The lenses had been painted entirely black. You couldn't see anything at all. None of this made any sense. I could only assume that Annette had been developing dementia. The photograph didn't have any missing person for a change, at least as far as I could see. It was of me and my mom sitting with Mr. Carter and his son Miles. Me and Miles seemed to be around 7 in the picture, and Mr. Carter was my Uncle Trevor's best friend, so we'd see him at family events every now and then. I don't really remember Miles very well, but I remember us getting on fine. Mr. Carter died in a car accident not too long after this picture must have been taken. As it happens, Miles got taken into a foster home, and I really don't know what happened after that. The only thing left to do was to check out the VHS tape, so I dug through my things until I found my old VHS player. I was hoping this would help somehow, but it didn't. The VHS just had one short home video. It's of one of the gatherings from Annette's photo album. The family is all there in a picnic, laughing happily, and there, clear as day, laughing along, was the man I saw as a child at that strange house. Just looking at him again made my hair on my arms stand up. He seemed more normal here. No bleeding lips, no suit, just getting along happily with the rest of the family. Was this man's name Arnold? I couldn't be sure. Then the camera panned away for a second to a child crying inconsolably. I recognized the child as Miles. He looked the same age as he was in the photograph earlier. When the camera panned back, the man was gone. The family didn't react. They continued laughing and talking, as if he was never there. Since then, I've tried to show the VHS to the people in my family I'd spoken to. Their reactions were absolutely bizarre. When I showed my mom, she got irrationally angry and told me to never show her that again. I'd invited her over for lunch, but she just left. I'd never seen my mom remotely annoyed at me for years, but she was furious. She wouldn't answer any of my calls. I took a video on my phone of the tape and sent it to some other family members, and I didn't get a response from any of them. My cousin Nate even blocked my number. I'd always thought we were a family of straight talkers. I don't understand why that was changing. The only thing I could think to do was talk to Uncle Trevor. Whatever all of this meant, Miles seemed to be tied to it. Trevor was my best connection to Miles. I sent him the video of the tape. After a while, I got a call from him. That gave me hope. He was the only person so far who didn't immediately avoid me. We talked for a while. He told me he had no idea who the man in the video was. I asked him if the name Arnold meant anything to him, but he said no. What he did tell me, though, was that he heard Miles ran away shortly after the foster system placed him with a family, and he was never found. That was all he knew. I got him to tell me what foster home he was in, and thanked him for his help before saying goodbye. The next day I contacted the foster home over the phone. I got put on hold for a long time, and instead of the usual elevator music you hear on hold, I heard Dirty Work by Steely Dan. That bothered me a lot, even though I've always liked their music. Eventually, I got to speak with a weary, elderly-sounding social worker, who seemed to barely remember the case. The conversation was full of half-remembered details and dead ends. She told me she couldn't find a full file on Miles, but she did have an old, partial log entry. It wasn't digital, it was a photocopy of 2 handwritten notes. She said she would type them out for me and asked for my email so she could send them. I agreed, and she hung up. Later that day, I got the email. The email confirmed Miles was placed in the foster system. Then it contained 2 notes, which I'll give you here verbatim. 12/04/2022. Follow up to call the foster home. Miss Peterson states Miles has been quiet, no trouble. Says he spent a lot of his time alone in his room. Claims he has an imaginary friend he talks to. Scheduled home visit next week. The next entry was from a different social worker, dated a month later. Case file update. Foster family reports Miles ran away. No belongings taken. No signs of struggle. Police report filed. Case status inactive. I didn't know what to make of it, but it was clear at this stage that what was going on, Miles was involved. I just couldn't understand why I was the only one who seemed to be aware of it. The next day I went back to watch the VHS tape again, to see if there wasn't anything I hadn't picked up on, but somehow the video had changed. That man wasn't in it at all anymore. Miles was playing happily with me and the other kids. I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like the more I tried to remember and understand, the more the world revolted and covered it up. I spoke to my family again, and now they were all denying the existence of Mr. Carter and Miles, telling me they didn't know who I was talking about at all. Even Uncle Trevor, I argued desperately over the phone with him. "How can you not remember him?" I shouted. "He was best man at your wedding." He denied that too. Told me my father was his best man, asked what was coming over me, and what's worse is he sent me some of his wedding pictures. Sure enough, I could see my dad at the front of the crowd making a speech. I gave up at that point. Returned Annette's photo album to my mom and told myself to just forget about it. There's just one more thing. The next morning I went downstairs to see a Polaroid photograph sitting on the kitchen table. The photo showed a teenage boy sitting on a wooden floor. He was unharmed, but looking so miserable. Just from looking at the picture, I don't think I've ever felt sorrier for another person. And next to the photograph was a jar of golden honey. I've been thinking back to that man I saw at the strange house all those years ago, and what he said to me. "You won't tell anybody what you saw." Maybe that was still an active threat. So I'm forgetting about all of this. I'm gonna try to go back to my normal life. I don't know what sets me apart. I don't know why I'm the only one burdened with this knowledge. I've been brooding on all of this since it happened, and the more I do, the more it bothers me. I just wanted to share it all somewhere, where someone might believe me for a change. Thank you for listening, folks. When I was a kid, from around the ages of 2 to 10, I always watched the same show after school. Dandy's Wondrous Adventures. It was a show that I'd kept tabs on ever since I was a baby. It had been with me since the beginning, and for good reason. Even as an adult, I can point out the many lessons the show taught me as a boy. How to tie my shoes, how to properly eat, how to keep up conversations, and so on. It was a much-needed show for a kid of my upbringing. My dad had died before I was born in a botched robbery, and my mother worked as a surgeon, meaning she was gone most of the day, coming back home around 9 to 10 at night, so most of my youthful experiences were taught by the show. Every episode entered the same. Dandy, an anthropomorphic dandelion, and his sisters Rosie, Daisy, and Blue Bonnie would run up a hill, click their heels, which were leaves, face the viewer, and ask how their day had gone. They'd wait for about 5 seconds and would respond. If the episode was oriented around something happy, they'd all smile and say, "That's terrific!" And if it was oriented around something not happy, they'd all share a look of unanimous dissatisfaction and say, "Well, ain't that a shame?" Every time I came home from school, I'd divulge into the characters on how my day went. I always would be disappointed when my response didn't match theirs, and it never did. I tallied the times I matched their response, and with mine, I was down by 47 marks to my 0. Regardless, it was nice to see whatever my favorite cast of characters had in store for me that day. However, this static stream of constant enjoyment changed one afternoon. It was a rainy April day, and I had just gotten home after the torrent of watery sheets had ended its assault on me. I had no homework for the first day, and after finishing all of my chores, I galloped upstairs to turn on my TV and pay a visit to my friends. Once again, the episode entered the same way, with Dandy and his sisters dancing up the hill, stopping and asking me how my day had gone. My day had gone pretty poorly. At school, I had a teacher named Miss Carroll. I was the quiet, nerdy type in elementary school, so Miss Carroll saw me as easy pickings. She would berate me day in and day out about how weird I was, how I had no friends, and how I was a loser. Anytime I tried to report her, no one believed me. Usually I didn't respond, but today hurt a lot worse. One of my classmates told her about my dad, and used the newfound information as ammunition against me. She never hit me, but it felt like she did. It hurt. I confided with Dandy on the issue, how much I hated her, how rude she was, and my anger towards her for being such a jerk. In my endless tirade about how much I deplored her, it had accidentally slipped my mind that Dandy hadn't said anything. It had gone well over 5 seconds, but they didn't speak. No interruptions. No exclamations. Nothing. Silence. Even the music had ceased. Once my rant had subsided, I turned up to look at the TV. Their expressions were not the usual ones they wore. They didn't look happy or mildly sad. No. They looked mad. All of them wore this expression of intense grimace, like someone had just told them off or stole something and gotten caught doing it. Dandy looked the angriest. "How rude," he said, his speech sounding as if his teeth were clenched. Blue Bonnie stepped up to the screen, her arms crossed, staring me dead like a hawk. "People like that are just so bad, right?" she proclaimed. "You said it," they all announced. Slowly, their expressions of disdain faded. Dandy spoke up again. "Well, it's a good thing we're talking about bullies today, huh?" And they all shook their heads in approval. The episode transitioned to a school area, where they all gathered in what I would guess was the cafeteria. It was rosily colored, with hints of a bright pink, yellow, green, and red across all the furniture in the room, ranging from tables to art, common colors for a kid's show. Rosie pointed at another flower. He wasn't a part of the usual cast, but they all regarded him with some level of knowledge. "That's Mrs. Wiltskins, she's the worst!" Rosie exclaimed. "She's the school bully here, and worst of all, she's a teacher. Everyone's scared of her," Daisy said. Dandy took his place in the center of the screen. "To get a bully off of you, sometimes you have to teach them a good lesson. Give them a reason to think twice before messing with you. Right, guys?" They all unanimously uttered, "Mm-hmm," before turning all at once to the screen. Blue Bonnie looked at everyone else. "But won't you get in trouble for something like that?" she said. They all looked at her before turning back to face me. "To get a bully off of you, it's worth it." Their expressions then changed to one of a kinder look, smiling warmly at me before returning to the hall. They all joined in unison to wish me good luck for tomorrow, as they always did before the credits rolled. I was stunned. It was like the universe had aligned at that exact moment to help me with my problem. But it was the wrong solution. As much as I despised her, it wasn't worth it to get into a whole load of trouble for fighting a teacher. What good would it do to help my problem anyway? I'd have to do some serious damage to her for the bullying to cease. A simple hit to the nose would just make my problems worse. It honestly felt like the advice they had given me for the first time was bad. By that moment, the constant pitter-patter of rain had lulled me into a drowsy mess, so I decided to take a quick nap and recuperate. My head touched the soft, comforting surface of my pillow, and I slipped away into my dreams. Around 7:30, I awoke to one hell of a wake-up call. "Wake up!" It was violent, aggressive, booming, as though a prison warden was waking up an inmate. There was no friendliness in the command, no leeway, just rage. I popped out of my bed like a meerkat that had sensed an impending threat, but when I did, I saw the TV had been turned on, and there he was, Dandy. However, strangely enough, his sisters weren't there. The background was dark, nearly pitch black, with the moon present in the frames. The grass that was usually bright had turned sickly, adorning a new yellowish color. "So you won't listen?" Dandy said, his eyes furrowed into a deep burning glare. "We're trying to help you with a problem like we have for years." I didn't know what to say. It felt like my body was stuck. Was this sleep paralysis? Was it a dream? "Do you not like us anymore?" Before I could find the courage to stammer anything out, his sisters came at a shot. "Because we don't like you. We never liked you." Their words burned, while my throat felt like it was held in place with barbed wire. Dandy moved forward. "Maybe she's right. Maybe you are a loser." They all began to snicker until it eventually devolved into laughter. They shot out snide remarks, comments about my hair, face, anything they could latch onto. They even bit into my dad's death. "He probably did it on purpose. Who would want to have a son like you?" Rosie said. "I bet he faked his death to get away from you," Blue Bonnie said. "Or maybe he did it himself out of disappointment." Before Dandy could finish what he was going to say, I shut the TV off. I was a hot mess of tears, snot, and fear. Balled up on my bed, I couldn't bring myself to move until morning came. It was a Saturday, and Mom was at work still. She was at the hospital's best surgeon, meaning there were quite a few weekends where she'd be gone for half the day. I wanted to get up out of bed to get breakfast, but I was still in shock about the incident the night prior. Was it a dream? Was it just my imagination? No, it couldn't have been. All those words, insults, and crude remarks, I felt them all. After much thought, I finally crawled out of bed and went downstairs. The sky had cleared since yesterday with a bright and beautiful hue of blue and yellow beaming down for all to enjoy. After eating a healthy bowl of cereal, I returned to my room and decided to see if I could get some gaming in. I usually game during the weekends anyway, as my mom didn't let me play during school days. After a couple of hours on the console, a familiar yet mellow voice snapped my attention back to the TV. "Hey, friend!" It was Dandy again. In the past, that voice would be a source of comfort. but now it frightened me. I stood still, head not daring to look back at the character, who had become just as oppressive as my teacher. "Look at me, please." Dandy's voice wasn't violent this time. It was the same warm aura it had before the previous night. He sounded apologetic. I slowly looked over my shoulder. They were all there this time. Dandy, Bonnie Blue, Daisy, and Rose. But they weren't standing, they were sitting on the hill. The background had returned to its entrancing bright blue color, and the grass looked healthy again. Everything had returned to normal apart from the characters. Their faces now expressed a look of regret. "We're sorry, friend. We didn't mean to lash out like that," Bonnie Blue said, her eyes sporting a much brighter, kinder look. "It isn't you, it's us," Daisy said, her leafy hands clasped together in her laugh. "We know you still like us, really we do," Rosie exclaimed. Dandy then took his turn to look at me, his character near the leftmost part of that frame. "We had an issue like you once. Miss Wilkins would treat us badly. She hated every kid she saw in that school, but for us, she hated us the most." I moved from my chair to stand right in front of the TV. My ears, eyes, and mind completely intertwined with the screen in front of me. It was unbelievable. "She said that we were troubled children who deserved to be alone," Daisy said. "We had no parents of our own, so we relied on her," Dandy said. "One day Miss Whitkins said she had enough with our behavior. She dragged us into the drawing room, locked us in there, and left us there," Bonnie Blue proclaimed. Dandy looked up from his lap, his eyes a constant of sadness and misery. "We never left," he said. "We don't want the same for you," Rosie announced. "You made us happy, so we want you to be happy. We just got scared that you might move on to the same path," Dandy said. I smiled at the TV, beaming happiness through their kind words. It was still a show at the end of the day, so I thought that was their way of teaching courtesy and openness. "But we think it's time for us to say goodbye." My smile quickly dissipated into a slightly open mouth, my eyes wide with surprise. "You're getting old now. Big and strong, just like your dad," Daisy exclaimed, her smile replacing mine. "We've taught you all we can, friend," Rosie said. I grasped the TV, words slowly bubbling into my throat, of pleas for them to stay. "We always cared about you, even when you were with us back there," Bonnie Blue said. They all stood up and took each other's hands, and smiled the widest smiles I've ever seen them showcase. My head was pressed up against the glass panel, separating me from them, my eyes a waterfall of emotion and distress. I begged for them not to leave. "Thank you for tuning in with us, friend," they all said. Slowly but surely, the screen faded to black, and in big white black letters, the words "The End" covered the TV. Then it cut to static. All that remained was me, weeping and shattered. Years later, on my 16th birthday, after a big party with my closest friends, of whom I had many at that point, my mom called me into the living room. I thought maybe there was another present waiting for me, so I eagerly waltzed into the room with an immense pep in my step. But my mom did not share my enthusiasm. She looked sullen and tense. "Sit down, please," she said, her voice controlled and centered yet anxious. I complied, my own appearance visibly moving downwards into a look of paralleled seriousness. "I know this is your big day, but we need to talk to you about something. Something I've been meaning to tell you for a while." What proceeded to be said to me shook the core of my world together. My mom said to me that while it was true my dad died in a botched robbery, he wasn't really my real dad, and that she wasn't my real mom. I had lost my original family a year after I was born in a car accident on the freeway, after a truck had lost control and slammed into the side of the car. They died on impact. I was lucky, as I had been at daycare, which they were coming to pick me up from. I had no extended family, so I was put into the foster care program, and adopted by a woman named Miss Wilkins, who was a boarding school teacher in her past.
According to Mom, she was an extremely cruel woman who would regularly beat her adopted children for the littlest of reasons, ranging from breathing too loud to having a cough. One day, however, she went too far when 4 of her children, after supposedly protecting me from a vicious beating, were locked in a room for a week. They didn't come back out. The other kids, including myself, were not let out of the house after that, to avoid any of us telling another person what she had done to them. Eventually, the neighbors noticed how we weren't leaving and called the police. Miss Wilkins was sentenced to life in prison. I was stunned, unable to move as though I was locked in place by my feet. Take as much time as you need to process this. I'm right here, my mother said. As my mind began to make sense of it all, I started having sparks fire off of my brain. Miss Wilkins. I could have sworn I knew that name from somewhere. Wilkins, and then it hit me, like a boulder rolling down a hill. Miss Wilkins, the teacher from the show. I rushed out of the living room up to my bedroom and threw my computer open with almost lightning fast speed. I looked up the case, typing everything I could in, praying I could find something. The 5 searches propped up were generic results of other heinous foster parents. But on the 5th search, I found it. Boarding school teacher charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder after locking children in the room. I scrolled through the article, and everything aligned with what my mom said. There was no mention of my name anywhere, but the presence of them defending another kid was in the article. Along with it, photos of the drawings they made while locked inside were posted onto the article itself. All were pictures of them as flowers. At the bottom, it listed the names of the deceased children. My heart sank, and my jaw followed its motion. Rosalina Matthews, Bonnabelle Lee, Daisy McCullen, Daniel Morello. I had no words. I had no movement. I felt as though the world itself had spun upside down, and I was bearing the brunt of it. Snapping out of my haze, I looked up at the cartoon. I searched for what felt like hours. Nothing. Not a single mention of any show called Dandy's Wondrous Adventures. It made no sense. What the hell was I watching then? Did I imagine it? Was I going through some sort of trauma-induced hallucination? It shattered what little grip I had on reality left at the moment. Their names, the show, the antagonist of that one rainy day. It all neatly funneled into this one case that I had apparently been involved with when I was just a toddler. And yet, it only added more complexities and more emotions. Fear, confusion, sadness, empathy, and finally, courage. I'm 28 now, and I have been an animator for over 8 years. Recently, I pitched the idea for Dandy's Wondrous Adventures to the board, and just yesterday it was approved. I did it for them. Whether or not the show I watched was real, this one will be, and I wanted to help people just like me, just like them. I've never told anyone this story, and I never planned to, until today. As of writing this, I received an envelope at my door from an anonymous writer. All it says on the front of the envelope is, "From your friends." Inside the envelope was a crumpled, old, worn piece of paper. It looked as though it had been set out in the sun for years. On one side of the paper was a drawing, as though made by a kid, or rather a group of kids, as all the styles were different. It looked fresh, completely out of place with the worn-down canvas that had been used. On the drawing was them, the characters. They all adorned beautiful white wings and halos above their head, while a small, pretty purple butterfly guides them towards the sun. All of them are hand in hand, just like the last time I saw them. On the back, in the 4 corners of the paper, in yellow, indigo, red, and white, was the same phrase, again and again. Yet the meaning and significance of the frames remained constant. Thank you. In the middle, a heart presented itself. Within it, colored in quadrants, the same colors used for the messages. Thank you too, friends. The wrong deer. Whenever I tell this story, I always start it the same way. I don't care if anyone believes me. Either you do, and you can empathize with me, or you don't. So you think I've created this terrifying experience out of thin air. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. This story is completely true. There is something stalking the mesquite thickets of East New Mexico. Several years ago, I was working at a dude ranch in southeast New Mexico. My job was incredibly enjoyable, and I made some of my closest friends out there, including my fiancée. The landscape was absolutely gorgeous. The ranch occupied almost 2,000 acres of rolling prairie and scrubland, with the back half being thickets of cactus and mesquite. The edge of the property was part of the Tonquah River with a huge field leading down to the hill and the bank. I'm creating a map of the property because locations will become important to the story. The first time I saw anything that gave me pause was one of my first nights at the ranch. We were due for some rain that night, and in the morning I had to demonstrate how to start a fire to the group I was taking out on the trail. Not wanting to embarrass myself with wet wood, I had the bright idea to go gather some before it started raining. Unfortunately for me, this was around 10 p.m. and was the only bright thing that night. We were out for about 40 minutes outside the nearest town, and with the sky being overcast, my weak little flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead of me. We had this huge old oak tree right in front of the tree line, and that was my destination. After a bit of a walk, you get to the tree and start piling wood into buckets I brought. I've never had much of a problem with being out in the woods at night, but that night it was so dark, it was difficult to keep my thoughts from straying into eerie places. After a couple of minutes, I felt like I was being watched. I started to glance around, but the hair-raising sensation of no longer being alone became a little bit overwhelming, and I was less and less confident being out there. As I turned around towards the trail, I froze. Staring out of the darkness were two glowing green eyes. They didn't blink or move, just stared at me. They were roughly 40 feet away on the other side of the path I had to reach. My gut wrenched. It was just so unnerving. I slowly walked forwards till I got to the path, then started to back away, never turning my back from them. My flashlight was too dim to ever see what the eyes belonged to, but just the fact I had to look slightly up at them made my skin crawl. Finally, when I judged I was far enough away, I turned and ran down the path to the road our guest area was at my house. The morning after, I had to run a camera to a group that was gathering at the oak tree. As I was leaving, I realized the place where the eyes had been was a clearing. The eyes were roughly in the middle of the clearing, and it was large enough in diameter that there was no way they could have belonged to something in a tree. I'm well over 6 feet tall, based off how far back I had to tilt my head to meet its gaze. It was easily over 7 feet tall. The realization made my blood run cold. Now, of course, nobody believed me at first, but this was only my first encounter with whatever prowled those woods, and the only one where I was ever alone. My second run-in with this thing about 4 months later in June. New summer staff arrived, and I was the only carryover into a new season. In our staff lounge one evening, I joined a group of about 9 other staff sharing creepy stories. My friend Elijah was in the middle of a doozy. When he was finished, he begged me to tell mine again. He had heard it before, but he was the only one. I told everybody. I could tell them. I could show them where it happened. Of course, everyone elected to go out to the oak with me. Once we were there, I told my tale and left everyone sufficiently on edge. The mood was still light, and since we were out there anyway, Elijah suggested we head out to a large boulder deep in the trees. The group was even between guys and girls, and there was a definite flirtatious vibe between most, so we agreed. Now, to get to this boulder, we would cross through the pasture that led down to the river, and afterwards down this very narrow path where the brush was thick and the trail was windy. You couldn't get more than 10 feet of visibility in front and behind you with nothing on either side. We made it through the pasture with no difficulty, besides Elijah scaring one of the girls by jumping out from behind a tree. Once on the narrow path, we had to walk two abreast, and my other buddy Alexander and I took up the rear. He and I were the only two who heard the voice calling out from the pasture we were just at. It almost seemed female, but completely devoid of emotion or pain, calling out softly, "Ow, help me." Alexa and I looked at each other, our eyes huge. I'm sure I was also as pale as he looked. There should have been nobody else out there with us. Our group were the only ones who had the night off, and it wasn't very plausible that a group of guests would be out there, and we didn't encounter them. Besides, anyone trying to mess with us surely would have just screamed or just even said more. I cannot begin to describe how wrong the voice was. The tone and inflection were almost robotic, and the "ow, help me" was all it said. We started to hurry everyone else up without freaking them out, and we came out of that section of the trail with two of us looking behind us constantly. When we got to the boulder, we tried to convince everyone to head back, but to no avail. Finally, Alex and I said we were going to leave, but as we turned around, we all saw the deer. It was on the trail we just exited, just standing there, watching us. But so much of it was wrong. It was much taller than any other deer we'd seen out there, and there were plenty. It was also somehow longer and crooked. Its head almost looked like it was put on sideways onto its neck. It just stood there looking at us, its appearance generally unnerving. But what it did next was frighten me the most. It backed up into the trees until we could no longer see it. That is what freaked me out the most. Every deer I've ever seen either turns outright and runs away, or just freezes until you get too close. This one just backed up out of sight. It was such a simple movement, but it was so unnatural, exactly like the call for help. We all looked around at each other nervously for a few minutes, then scrambled off the rock. When we were all huddled in a group, we ran. Together, we ran past where we'd seen it last, tore around the pastures and past the oak tree, till we stood panting on the porch of the lounge. We never really spoke of that night again together, but I always include in any retelling of this story. I have one more large encounter, the one that made me refuse to go back into the woods after dark. One thing you must understand is that there were several months between these three accounts, enough time for me to think, surely whatever that was isn't still here, right? The final time I went out to those woods was with my now fiancée. She and I had just started officially dating about a week before this terrible camping trip. I'd grown up camping as a kid, but she'd never been. Wanting to share with her something I found incredibly meaningful to my early life, I convinced her to join me for a one-night trip out into the woods. My plan was to go out there Friday evening through Sunday morning, and since she had to work Saturday, she joined me for my final night out there. Friday night was completely uneventful. I pitched my tent off one of those dirt access roads, in one of the spots used for overnight groups. It was a very average solo camping trip. I enjoyed myself completely. The next Saturday, my fiancée Haley drove up the dirt road to join me. It was once again a very nice evening, making hot dogs and s'mores, and after a couple of beers we retired to the tent. As we settled down for the night, we both heard something out in the woods. Haley turned to ask me if I'd also heard something, but I regretfully snapped at her to be quiet. There was no anger, but at that sound, The other two frightening stories I had were at the forefront of my mind. The sound we heard was very faint. If it hadn't lasted for more than a few seconds, it could have been dismissed as the wind. But it lasted much longer. It was singing, but completely toneless, devoid of any kind of humanity. It grew steadily louder, making me wide half circles towards our campsite. Our site was in a clearing off an access road. We were way out the pass to the boulder, or from a few months previously. This clearing was surrounded by prickly pear and mesquite, basically creating a massive barbed wire fence around us. The only clear spot was the path that led to the road, but the singing was coming from the opposite end of the clearing. Something was out in the woods, making its way through thorns and scrub, singing in a language we'd never heard before. Haley looked as terrified as I felt. I unzipped the tent and peered out with my light into the tree line. I couldn't see anything, but I could tell from the singing that whatever it was just out of my view. Less than 100 feet from the tent. It knew where we were, and didn't care if we knew where it was. I told Haley to run to the car. She scrambled out of the tent and ran through the dark towards her car. I followed, barefoot, in only shorts, with my knife and phone clutched in my hand. We made it to the car as the singing became deafeningly loud. We sped back to our lodging and spent the night wide awake in her room. Her laying on her bed, and I propped against the door, occasionally checking the windows. Well, into morning we drove back to pick up our stuff. The tent had been torn apart, and everything was ransacked. A horrible odor prevailed the clearing. What sent shivers down my spine, however, were the massive scratches and gouges in the tree nearest where the tent lay scattered. We finished up our contract and quickly moved to Colorado together. We also work at a ranch up here, and I am glad to say nothing about the woods up here feels malevolent. I've never heard any singing or seen any wrong deer, or been asked for help by any weird voices. I am completely content to stay far away from the mesquite thickets of New Mexico for the rest of my life.
The end of things started with a leaf trapped in my son's eye, written by Rue Morgue. "Don't touch it," I said, "not with your bare hands." My wife Anya and I stood over our son in the living room, turning his face under the light. There was what appeared to be a sapling maple leaf in the outer corner of his left eye, one half of it folded over, trapped under the lid. How it had got there, no one knew. There were plenty of maple trees nearby, certainly, but how any of their leaves had worked itself so deeply in by accident, I couldn't say. There was, of course, the possibility that Luke had, for some idiotic reason, put it there himself. But he wasn't the sort of kid that did those kinds of things. He was a serious, quiet boy, 8 going on 80, as Anya and I have always said. Even now he stood patiently as we twisted his face one way and the other, arguing over whether we should see a doctor or if we could get the leaf out by ourselves. "What if it scratches his eye?" I said. "He'll go blind." "Don't say that," Anya scolded. "It's only at the edge. We can pull it and it will come out." She kept reaching for Luke as though to pluck the leaf between her finger and thumb, and each time I stopped her, dread washing over me at the thought of her skin coming into contact with it. I didn't know where that feeling came from, or what it was exactly that I feared. Knowing didn't matter much to me, though. When I had a hunch about something, I trusted it, and throughout my life I'd never been wrong. "Tweezers," I said. "I'll go get them. That'll do it." I retrieved them as quickly as I could, feeling I couldn't trust Anya not to catch hold of the leaf and attempt to work it out while I was gone. She was as stubborn in her way as I was, the majority of our disagreements revolving around which of us was right on a particular issue. That we had successfully raised a child together sometimes amazed me. When I returned with the tweezers, Anya put out her hand for them. "Now hold on," I said. "I have the steadier grip."
Anya opened her mouth to argue, but Luke said abruptly, "I want Dad to do it." He spoke calmly, without any sign of hysterics, and even though this wasn't so far removed from his usual manner, I remember wanting to take a step back from him, even to turn and leave the room entirely. Only afterward did I realize that feeling came from him seeming to accept what was happening to him with the weary resignation of someone at the very end of their life. Holding the tweezers as delicately as I could, I took hold of the maple leaf, my other hand cupping the back of Luke's head and tilting it with a gentle caution towards the tool. Then I began to pull, watching the leaf emerge, damp and furled with the residue of tears. Only it didn't stop coming. There was a twig attached to the end of the leaf, and on, further vegetation dripping with moisture. Some of it was blood. Anya shrieked, but I couldn't seem to stop pulling, teasing out lengths and lengths of that delicate branch with a numb fascination. Luke didn't protest or show any kind of fear or pain, standing placidly and with complete trust in me as I continued reeling those leaves from the inside of his head. I couldn't understand how they had gotten there, imagining with an acute disgust of my son snapping off a young branch in the park and feeding it through his eye with a tranquil concentration. Still, I knew even then how it must have happened in reality, or some approximation of the cause. A seed or spore had gotten in somehow, and had, in the nutrient-rich warmth of the socket, begun to grow. I was vaguely aware of Anya moving frantically behind me, too hypnotized by the continuous strand of leaves to pay much attention to her. Then she was leaning over me, a pair of scissors in hand, cutting the twig as close to Luke's eye as she dared, so that way it fell away onto the carpet. I jumped back, appalled, not even wanting my clothes to chafe against it. "Luke," I said, "are you okay?" He blinked with difficulty, the cut stab of the twig catching his upper eyelid. "I'm okay," he said. "I can't really feel it, not that much anyway." I had wished he'd yell, cry, anything that would be normal for a child in his situation to do. But he was silent all the way to the hospital and throughout the various scans and tests that came after, as was my wife, who sat holding our son's hand, as though he'd vanish if she let go of him, even for a moment. She became restless each time they were separated, patrolling the waiting room until I took her by the shoulders and physically sat her down in one of the little plastic chairs. In the end, we were seen by a doctor in a private room, aware, even as we were ushered through the door, of the heaviness of that office. Luke sat in a corner with a crayon and notepad someone had given him, paying no notice to the conversation going on around him. Dr. Rylard kept glancing over at him, with an expression I found unreadable, and for that reason disconcerting. I immediately held suspicion that he was hiding something from us beyond Luke's prognosis. "So," said Anya, "the x-rays, the MRIs, whatever else you've been doing all this time, what's wrong with Luke?" Gathering us to a nearby wall, Dr. Rylard gestured to a set of images pinned against it. "You wanted to know how far the plant you had found had grown inside him," he said in a hushed undertone. "You thought he'd got a seed caught in his eye and all that started there?" "Well, didn't it?" I asked. "What do you mean by that?" But I could see copies of Luke's scans as clearly as anyone else in the room, saw the streaks of bone amidst gray pads of muscle and organs, and through them all was the structure of a web, the white shapes of many twigs and leaves. They were so prolific, the spread of them so profound that it was difficult to tell where they'd begun, the roots indistinguishable from the rest of the mass. I'd seen houses like that, so infested with ivy that brickwork loosened and came apart in its strangle. Looking at the images of my son's body, I understood that this is what was happening in front of us and had been happening for longer than we knew. "Is there nothing you can do about it?" I asked in a harsh whisper. "No extraction process, surgery or something?" Dr. Rylard shook his head. There's no possibility of him surviving the removal. You can see how the plant's grown through his lungs. Into his heart, there's already extensive damage. If we even begin to try, it'll only get worse. Anya ripped one of the pictures from the wall, her hand clenching so tightly that it crumpled at the edges. "So you're telling us that you won't do anything for our son?" she hissed. "You'll just let him die?" Dr. Rylard sighed and peered over at Luke again, who only doodled, oblivious to the whispered argument, or else ambivalent to it. "I am saying it's terminal, yes," he admitted. "We can look for options for palliative care today, or we can make another appointment, although I can't discuss other patients in any detail. What I can say is that surgery has been tried before in other cases. The survival rate is, well, low. Lower than low." "There's been other people here with this inside them," I asked. "What are you talking about? This is rare, surely." "I looked it up. It's supposed to be impossible." Dr. Rylard coughed and began shuffling documents, clearly hinting that our meeting was close to its end. "As I said, I can't discuss other patients with you." Anya put her hand out, blocking his way to the door. "Stop," she said. "You know something about this. What caused it? How did it happen?" Dr. Rylard's eyes flicked about in agitation. "I'm sorry, Miss Maxwell, but I really don't." "I want to go home now," said Luke in a clear, decisive voice, and we all looked at him in amazed silence as though commanded by some greater authority. "It doesn't hurt or anything. It's really okay if we go." He crossed the room and took his mother's hand, something he hadn't done in some time. Anya softened, and I noticed her glancing up into the fluorescent lights to stop herself crying in front of him. "Okay, baby," she said gently. "We'll go home." I lingered, staring at Dr. Rylard until he took a worried step back from me. "Is it like that for others too?" I snapped once my wife and son had left the room. "The way Luke's acting, like this is all normal and absolutely fine." Something gave way in the doctor's professional resolve, and he shook his head. "No, they're not all like that. Some of them get angry, and between you and me, that's a whole lot worse." In that moment, I hated him. Hated with all the impotent rage I couldn't direct at the tree that was killing my son. "Yeah," I said, "you're right. What's the point if there's nothing you can do?" Anya and I walked, holding Luke's hand, across the hospital parking lot, the way we had always done before he had announced that he was too old to do it anymore. He looked at everything. Birds in the sky, cars in unique colors, stones on the ground, all with the same easy interest with which he'd always examined the world, unaffected by the twig that was already beginning to extend from his eye again. I wondered why it didn't hurt to have it go through him, and presumably feed on him. Perhaps some hormone had been released from the leaves to make him a more agreeable host. I had been thinking of it as a disease since the beginning, I realized, and likely infectious at that. I felt an impulse to ask Luke questions about it, wanting to know why he wasn't scared of death, but he seemed so small and innocent to me that I couldn't bring myself to do it. Torn up into pieces by my grief, I forced myself merely to walk with him, nodding at each comment he made as though it didn't kill me to hold it all together. A man approached us from our right, stumbling a little, homeless. I thought at first, or drunk. I felt sorry for him, struggling across the tarmac in the heat, likely with nowhere to go. Then, as he came closer, swiveling his head towards us, I saw there were rose thorns growing out of every facial orifice, petals dripping free of him like blood. He was stumbling because he was blind, and he had been abandoned in that parking lot by friends or family, likely terrified of him and with no idea of what else to do. Anya gave him a little scream of shock, but Luke only stood still, watching the stranger without visible fear or horror at his appearance. "Sir," I said, feeling I had to be some kind of normalcy to the situation. "Sir, let me help you." The man jumped slightly at the sound of my voice, apparently still able to hear at least in some capacity. He shuffled nearer, and I realized the danger of approaching him this way. "Some of them get angry," the doctor said after all. "Sir," I said again, this time with more caution, "I just want to help. My son's like you. He has your condition." The man nodded. I saw as he opened his mouth wider to speak that his tongue had been slit in two by the thorns. His words were a sort of mumbled gargle, improperly formed. "It'll happen to all of us," he told me. "It's catching, somehow. Anyone that's close gets it too. That's what they're saying out there." Anya tried pulling Luke away towards the car, signing for me to follow. To the old man I said, "Who's saying it? And out where?" But he only bumbled hopelessly on towards that hospital entrance, and I let him go, feeling pity that he was only going to be turned out to the street again to die. We tried to keep Luke comfortable at home in the weeks after that, which was simple enough, being that he would sit watching cartoons or reading comic books without a care for the growths that we had to cut back from his face day by day. One night, as Anya and I were putting him to bed, Luke asked, "When I'm a tree, will you plant me outside in the yard, so I could still be here with you?" I knelt beside him, avoiding looking at the maple leaf I could see flattened to the inside of his mouth. "You're not going to be a tree, buddy," I said. "We're not going to let that happen, all right?" Luke looked at me sadly. "I know you can't fix me, Dad." "Honey, come here a sec," said Anya, and she tugged at my arm, attempting to draw me away. "I'm not going to let anything hurt you, Lukey," I insisted. "I won't." Anya ushered me to the door and then went to kiss Luke on the forehead. "Good night, baby," she said. "Don't worry about this anymore." Once we were back downstairs, she punched my shoulder lightly. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" I protested. "I mean it. You know the doctor was right. You've seen how things are going, and even though we can't hide it from him like Luke sees it too." By then, we'd learned what the man in the parking lot had been talking about from online platforms and televised news. We'd become media addicts, unable to keep ourselves from watching update after update, dissecting each new theory before cycling back to the old again, in a compulsive and fascinated dread. It began with country people, farmers and orchard workers, anyone that worked closely with plants, particularly trees, and came into contact with them daily. The friends and relatives that had survived them all supported their loved ones coming home with injuries like Luke's, in which leaves, thorns, or parts of flower heads began protruding from cuts or bodily apertures. Attempts had been made to cut the growing plants or amputate infested limbs to kill the infection, but the trees were stubborn and deeply grew hardily in the flower beds of flesh. All of these early victims had died in one way or another. Some, in the late stages of their growths, had gone out to the places of work and stood amongst the trees and flowers there, succumbing willingly to the takeover, in belief that they weren't merely dying but becoming something else, which to them wasn't such a terrible thing. Afterwards, government agents had come by and taken them away to be studied, which had resulted in outcry amongst the relatives until the phenomenon had become so widely spread that it was obviously necessary. Others, amongst the first of wood, as those affected became rapidly known, did not die quietly. They became enraged by their oncoming ends, vandalizing the fields and groves they saw as responsible for their condition before killing themselves, often via immolation, so they took the invading lives inside their body with them. It would never be known how wood spread, whether by touch or if spores lying dormant in the bodies, if their hosts had simply activated in sympathy with those around them. Whatever the case, the areas where these initial instances of infections began were closed off from outsiders. The plants on those properties contained or safely discarded. But this didn't stop the phenomenon creeping into villages, towns, and cities where trees and other plant life were scarce. Scientists were consulted on the epidemic, invited to share their hypotheses or talk shows and news channels. There was no agreed explanation among them. Some believed that certain plants had communicated via chemical signals and fungal systems in order to develop a form of attack against the destructive human race, whereas others believed what they were witnessing was the rise of a new parasitic life form, able to take on various physical characteristics. One scientist, an outlier quickly shunned by her colleagues, claimed that the subjects that resigned themselves to their changes had been correct in what they were experiencing was a rapid stage of human evolution. Notice that it always starts from within and grows outward, she says. The plants even resemble the person they came from in small ways. I don't think we should be destroying these people. And that's what they still are, but honoring what nature has decided they become. This did not go down well amongst viewers, provoking a fresh surge of violence in response. Anya held my hand as we watched crowds set fire to forests across our television screens, some of them still partially human and screaming out to be saved. Journalists milled around with microphones, accosting masked arsonists for commentary. We need trees for fuel to build things, and most importantly, oxygen. Is burning them all the wisest course of action? A young man in navy balaclava shrugged his shoulders. It's them or us, isn't it? Well, it's both of us with this approach, said the journalist, adjusting his glasses and blinking against the sweat falling behind them. Without trees, we're taking ecological devastation, climate change. But the young one was already wandering away through the smoke, disinterested in the conversation. As the weeks passed and our fear mounted, another group arose amidst the haze. These people claimed to have developed a chemical that could be injected, bathed in, or ingested, destroying the infecting plant while leaving the host alive. Many dismissed the notion, claiming it was snake oil or being sold on the streets as a dangerous drug that would maim or kill anyone that used it. Many turned to it anyway. They were all going to die, after all, whether they touched the chemical or not. There were attempts to criminalize its sale and manufacture, but with anyone able to afford seeking refuge in the bunkers and other quarantine spaces, and vigilantes rounding up the wood to burn, there was no regulating anything anymore. Anya and I attempted to maintain some semblance of ordinary routine around the house. It was all that kept us stable, tricking ourselves into skirting the edge of breakdown, rather than tipping headfirst into it as so many others had done. We tried to keep Luke from learning of any of what was going outside in the world, switching off our shows or locking our phones when he entered a room. Yet sometimes in the night I'd slip downstairs to find him camped out in front of the TV, watching whatever news channel he could find, and idly picking at the maple leaf that had begun its sneaking progress out of its eye again. One morning I found he wasn't in his bed, and after looking all over the house, I admitted to Aya that he was no longer indoors. "Where would he go?" asked Anya, the shake in her voice breaking every word into 2 syllables. "Where is he?" But her gaze, like mine, had already fallen on the back door which stood open in the yard. We went to it side by side, not wanting to see what we knew from 1,000 similar televised images would be there. Anya let out a sound, not a scream, which would have been better. Less awful than the sound that seemed to come from her very gut, thick and deep. I staggered out into the yard, driven as people are sometimes to be, close to terrible things and prove they are real. Luke, or what Luke was now, knelt on the lawn, his little body held upright by the tree that had grown up through his throat, his spine the staff that allowed its progression through the sun. His arms swung useless at his sides, and his eyes... I couldn't stand to look at his eyes. I saw them without seeing intentionally, blurring my focus to avoid taking them in. While Anya stood crying against the back door, I walked with a dull sense of purpose over to the shed and came out wearing a pair of thick gardening gloves, a spade clenched under one arm. As I advanced towards what was left of my son, Anya called out to me. "What are you doing?" "Burying him," I said flatly. "The funeral homes won't take him, and sooner or later the government will send people by to pick him up for whatever it is they're doing with the bodies, or the vigilantes will come knocking. This is a better way." I closed my fists over the handle of the spade, tried to think of Luke's body as a doll. or as a scarecrow, some other inanimate thing. That's something only looked at. Alex, said Anya, don't. Please just leave him. Leave him. This is what he wanted. It is what the thing wanted, I snapped at her. That thing was through his brain, wanted him to die out there. Don't you see that? Anya watched me, pleading with silent tears in her eyes, and in the end I didn't touch him, not because of her, but because the thought of doing so sickened me. We left Luke there for weeks to slowly decompose, and the tree spread its branches from him through the long afternoon as it had longed for. I kept the blinds down on that side of the house, and then, as suspected, that our neighbors did the same. Once in the following days, I peeked out to see Anya standing by the maple tree, talking to it the way she did to Luke, and I couldn't help but notice the way the leaves had grown over the skull looked like a face. A month later, Anya and I lay in bed holding each other, weary with grief and the uncertainty of everything, neither of us talking much, and there being nothing to say. Running my hand over her back, I felt something sharp under her right shoulder blade, and choked on a breath as it came loose in my fingertips. "What's wrong?" asked Anya, pulling back from me slightly to frown through the gloom. "Nothing," I said. "Cramp, that's all. I'd better get up and stretch it out." I went down to the kitchen. After shutting the door behind me, looked down at what I was holding. There was a maple leaf in my hand, the first sign of what was growing inside Anya, and now was surely in me as well. I leaned against the counter and cried like a little kid. Cried for the son I had lost, the wife I was losing, and for myself, dying without any idea of how much time I had left. Till then, I hadn't understood how those consumed by the plants didn't feel what was inside them, how they remained completely ignorant until they began to force their way, visibly under the skin. I had convinced myself that they must have known, only lied to themselves about the sensations and symptoms of having their bodies invaded. The functions of their organs slowed down, and even stopped entirely by the obstructing vegetation. Now I understood, for now I was aware of what was going through my body. I could feel it, the fullness of that new organism and its development through my muscles and into the chambers of my brain. I felt it becoming a new part of me, and I could see now how some of the infected succumbed to it, even imagined themselves becoming something new and good. Anya would be one of those people I knew. She had been changed since Luke had died, had given up on what was left of life, being that she had lost hers with him. Maybe when she felt the maple close in over her heart, she'd go out into the backyard and stand with him. Let the things that had killed them both grow together, long after even their bones were rocked down to dust. As I walked shakily back into the bedroom and lay down in the dark, I decided I wouldn't do the same. I had seen myself in the faces of the raging protesters in the news. I had already made myself familiar with it, with the local backstreet vendors of the chemicals they say can cure, even if I don't believe it. One day soon I'll inject myself and Anya with that product, and wait for it to work on the enemies inside us. And if it doesn't, God, I'm sorry for it. But I'll burn the maple in the yard that's still eating the scraps of my son, and then my wife and I. The world is ending in forest fires, but I'd rather go out that way, go out angry, still as a husband, still as a father, still as a man.
My neighbor was shot by the police, but no one remembers it. Written by OCD Incarnate. Back in November, I woke to sirens and screaming. I looked out of the window, and cops were everywhere, each of them surrounding the yellow house across the street from me, with their pistols drawn, going from door to door, evacuating my neighborhood. I couldn't even begin to tell you how surreal it was to hear the cacophony of gunfire that killed Gary as the whole neighborhood walked down the street, children's blankets dragging behind. Gary, the sweet old man, overpaid me to shovel snow into his driveway when I was a kid. Gary, the guy who gave full-sized candy bars on Halloween. Gary, the man who ran into a burning house to save a family's dog. The case was all over national news. Woman escapes elderly serial killer in small Kansas town. Bodies in the basement. Gary's house of horrors. Gary motivation appears to be ideological in nature, says the police. I read it all obsessively, trying to understand how a man I considered my friend my whole life could do the things he had done. Gary had grown up in that house and moved back in when he inherited it from his parents. They found a total of 27 bodies spanning 50 years, meaning he began killing at merely 13 years old. The oldest few corpses were all middle school aged, and were found buried in a rose garden, one I'd helped him weed on one or more occasions. 5 more were found under a secret door in his floorboards. I felt sick knowing I had walked over that door multiple times. The rest were found in boxes in his basement, in bags full of lye. Boxes my mother had helped him stack when he's enlisted the family's help in organizing his basement after his beloved wife Loretta had died of ALS. It must have been months that his house was taped off. His escapees' bloody handprints weren't washed off for at least a week, and the blood pooled on his front porch from the gunfire that stayed just as long. Today I woke up to see Gary walking up to his mailbox as always. I thought I was dreaming, but I felt all the pinches I gave myself, and I couldn't wake myself up no matter what means I tried. I watched him from the window all morning as he tended to his yard as always. He even went to our neighbor's house to borrow a gardening tool. They didn't seem surprised at all to see him. I began to rifle through the memories. There were no goddamn way these details could be a dream. I watched from my window as they taped off the scene. I saw the first skull excavated from the dirt of the rose garden with my own 2 eyes. I had cried to my therapist recounting hearing his death, struggling to understand how I could feel grief over a man so evil. I know it fucking happened. I searched the names of the 3 victims that had been identified. All were real missing people from my general area. All of them looked exactly as they had in the news articles I had printed out that seemed to no longer exist in neither my home or the internet. I had never seen them before Gary's crimes were exposed. I've been carefully watching Gary's movements all days. He recently retired and he spends all of his time outside. If I really am crazy or I really did dream all of this up, how can I explain to him why I'm digging a gigantic hole in his cherished rose garden? How can I reasonably explain why I've broken into his home to explore his basement? He's an incredibly light sleeper. I know this because he was very nosy and would gossip about things he'd seen the neighbors do late at night. And when he's not asleep, he's wandering around. He never really sits down, and ever since one of the neighbors showed him Instacart and Uber, he never leaves. Can I file a tip? Say I saw the bodies in an old man's basement or something? The cops around here know Gary, so I doubt they'd believe it, or bother to check, and they know me too, so it would be impossible to do so anonymously. Do any of you have any ideas? I can't stop hearing the waters at 3 a.m. I'm lying in bed, eyes wide open, counting the eerie dancing shadows cast by the trees and tens of other whatnots on the wall in front of me. It is a dimly lit night in the new moon, and yet the fading moonlight managed to sneak through the gaps in the curtains, bathing the room in its pale luminescence. There's the sound of water. Among the clock, the crickets, and the rattles of the freight apartment, there is a foreign sound, and what had knocked me out of my sleep. Water. It isn't the rain or the sewage that runs too close to my window, but more of a at-late-night shower from an apartment upstairs. which takes place at a very questionable time and has lasted for an alarmingly long period. I look at my phone. It's 3 o'clock in the morning on a normal Monday night, meaning that nobody should be taking a shower. Still, the sound of the water falling, splashing, rippling slowly, steadily, annoyingly, coming to me through the ceiling above my head. I turn again, this time to the opposite side, only to find myself facing a worse direction. The closed wardrobe door, dark and wooden, silent and looming over me, threatening like a wicked giant monster. I built the wardrobe myself, and yet right at that moment, I can sense my skin jumping at its familiarity. I sigh and return to my back, lying face up, eyeing the ceiling. I can vaguely picture the pipes hidden behind the wood and the cement, above my apartment, but beneath the one upstairs, seeing with my imagination the water running through them and causing the noise that startled my sleep. I was in the middle of a nightmare and yanked back to reality when I heard it. The nightmare was far from pleasant, but right now I want nothing more than to be able to get back there. I was involved in a ritual with some of my friends, offering a demon blood with the promise to never lie. Except I lied. I was just a stupid ritual game, and I didn't think much, and apparently the absence of a thorough conscience comes with a hefty price. The demon hunts me down, a typical dream chase. I was cornered and looking right at it, and I was terrified. It was a dream, but it was vivid. The demon had a long tongue, twisted limbs, and a bent neck. Its skin is like a printing paper, veins of blood running all over the place. As soon as the demon opened its mouth to talk, I heard the sounds of water. It makes my hair grow thinking about it. The demon has the voice of a running shower, and the water doesn't stop. If anything, it only gets louder, now that my focus is solely fixed on it. The splash of the shower hitting the floor, the glub of the flow going down the drain, the burbles when it rushes through the pipes, the echo as it ripples above the ceiling, and the repeat of the whole damn cycle, all of them blaring and drilling, constantly torturing my ears. I have no idea why someone in their right mind would think of this as a good time for a shower, let alone one that has lasted far longer than necessary. None of them seems to make any sense to me, and at some point I feel the urge to go check if their residents are all right enough to be let alone with a shower running freely for that long. I end up doing nothing, however. A part of me knows that there's nobody crazy enough to take a shower, or nobody at all seen anyone living there since I moved here. The remaining part of me knows something else, that the water has something to do with me, alone, probably connected to my nightmare, precisely with the demon to whom I offered my blood and promised not to lie, only to do this same exact forbidden thing. That's why I stay inside my apartment, enveloped by the mess of a room, curling up into a ball and hanging onto the faint hope that the act somehow mutes the foreign sound of water. Much to my surprise and dismay, it doesn't. If not, my efforts have somehow made the volume grow louder than before. I reach up with the fingers spread out, instinctively grabbing my earlobes, trying to block the sound away. It seems like something a coward would do, but I don't care. I let my ears be covered and close my eyes in a failed attempt to escape reality and lure myself back to the nightmare, only to be stirred up and startled again by the increasing volume of that damn cycle. Splash, glub, ripple, echo, splash, glub, ripple, echo. It isn't until then that do I realize the water doesn't sound like something from outside, but more like a reverberation of what seemed to be stored and buried inside of me. I don't know how long I've stayed in that position, but as the realization makes me swing off the blanket and sit up with my feet on the floor, my body's all sweaty. A wise person would call in, preferably the cops or the hospital, for an emergency. I just freeze. I'm that stupid, what can I say? I look up above my head and wait, engulfing myself in the sound of water, which stands out against the silence of my room, against anything that's a part of reality. I hear it loud and clear, and feel each inch of my body clenching to it. My fingers are buried into the soft fabric of my mattress. My toes dig deeper into the wooden floor. My eyes are urged to shut, but painfully stay open. My throat is stuffed with a lump, and my heart sinks, almost as if it has stopped functioning. And then, with almost an abrupt halt of the heartbeat, I missed blink of my dry and burning eyes. Without any sign, warning, or expectation, the water suddenly stopped. It happened without me even fully acknowledging it during the first seconds. And it takes me a while to come to realize that the sounds that knocked me out of my sleep are now gone. The usual silence of the night returns, so clear that I can hear my unsettling heartbeats and ragged breath. Then the familiar crickets, wind rustles, and house rattles dominate my hearing again, as if they weren't just toppled a few seconds ago by the bizarre sound of a late-night shower. It seems who, or whatever decided to do it, has realized the stupidity and health hazard of their actions. So instead of going with the nonsense flow, they turned off the shower, like a normal and functioning human who gives a damn about their well-being. They should be in bed then, now that I hear no noise that interferes with the usual and natural sounds of whatever is coming to life at 3ish in the morning. It should be the most probable thing to do at this hour, also the most logical explanation to what had taken place in the apartment upstairs. And yet something inside me isn't fully convinced. My instinct spikes here and there, trying to remind me of something I don't want to remember. My eyes still burning, my throat feels stuffy, and my heart remains seized with invisible force I can't name. I ignore the feelings and release them one by one, through my deep sighs as I collapse on the mattress, letting my body be sucked into the sweaty pile of blanket and pillow. From the corner of my eyes, I see the clock on my nightstand. It is 4 a.m, meaning roughly an hour has passed. Somebody upstairs, who shouldn't have been there in the first place, had just taken an almost 2-hour-long shower, letting the water flow constantly, and I have no idea why they abruptly ended it. Or do I? As I look at the wardrobe I built myself, the eerie feeling returns. The nightmare's image filled my head bit by bit. It was a nightmare, but it was also a reflection of reality. I played a horror ritual game with my friends. We weren't allowed to lie. I lied. Pieces of memories return. I lied, so my friends died. We all hid in the wardrobe and got killed there. So that's why earlier I found it uncanny. My friends all died, but the demons spared me somehow. Maybe there's a hidden rule that the liar prevails in the game, and all of us were simply illiterate enough to miss it. Maybe I did something to help myself through it. Maybe I made a deal with the demon so that my friends had to go first and I was allowed to remain. My head turns empty. Everything starts to blur again, and I'm not sure if it'd come back someday, but there's one thing I remember for sure. I had blood all over my body. I had to take a shower. The game ended with my friend's death at 3 a.m, and that is when I started removing the blood. This story was written by Avian Hohen. That is the end of today's video. If you all enjoyed the stories I had for you, remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and maybe check out the playlist of horror stories I have for you. I will see you all next time. Farewell, my friend. Until next time. My dead dog came back to say goodbye. He wasn't alone. Vigo was with me for over 10 years. I got him when I was a sophomore in high school. I still remember bringing him home, a little boxer puppy in my arms. A year after graduating, I moved out of my parents' place to live with a couple of friends, and he stayed with my parents while I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment that didn't allow pets. Eventually, one of my roommates met a girl. They hit it off and moved in together. My remaining friend and I moved into a bottom-floor 2-bedroom apartment. It was in a smaller, nicer complex that allowed pets, and I was finally able to have Vigo live with me. He lived with me for 6 years before his illness started catching up to him. Vigo started developing heart conditions 2 years before he passed. At first, he would lay down at random moments during a walk. Then I started noticing he would pass out suddenly while we were at home. Exercise soon became something he could no longer do. It broke me to see him slow down when he got older, as he was always such an energetic dog. Vigo passed away suddenly while at home. I was well aware this could happen due to his pre-existing conditions, but as much as I had told myself I was ready, it was hard to imagine how you'll feel before it happens. He passed on Sunday morning. The rest of the day was rough for me, and I couldn't bring myself to move his things. In order to try and distract myself, I still went to work on Monday, and the rest of the week. I definitely overworked myself that week, all while dreading the upcoming weekend. The first whole weekend I would spend without Vigo. My roommate Zeke, noticing I was running on little sleep just by glancing at me, offered me some weed before he went out on Friday night. As usual, I declined the offer. I'm in the minority nowadays, but I've never been the biggest fan of smoking weed. I much prefer to have a drink. Come on, Tom, come along with us, invite your girl Emily, Zeke urged me again before walking out. She's actually working late tonight. She said she'll come over tomorrow. I'm just gonna try and get some rest for now, I said, laying on the living room sofa, watching TV while he opened the front door. Well, suit yourself. If you change your mind, you know where my stash is. I got some pre-made joints I made yesterday. It'll help you sleep and likely put you in a better mood, Zeke said before walking out the door, shutting and locking it behind him. It was past midnight when I finally got up from the living room couch and headed to my room. Vigo's bed and empty bowls greeted me when I walked in. He had slept in my room ever since he moved in with me. All of his things were still laid against the left wall of my room, as if he were still around. "Good night, buddy," I said out loud. I then laid down on my bed and closed my teary eyes, trying to sleep. I gave up after tossing and turning for over an hour. Getting up, I walked over to Zeke's room and was greeted by a certain smell when I walked in. Zeke is most definitely a stoner who will dabble into other drugs, but only on occasion. He doesn't let weed interfere with his life and usually only smokes at home. Whatever I smelled in his room, though, that was not weed. It was a musty smell, and if I asked him about it, I'm sure his answer would start with, "So I know a guy." Inside his room, I walked to the dresser on the far wall and opened the third drawer on the left. A medium-sized wooden tea box was tucked in the back of the drawer. I pulled it out, accidentally spilling a few of its contents out, and set it on his bed as I opened it. There were various strains to choose from, all organized and labeled separately in small glass jars and Ziploc bags and in different compartments. I pulled out the 2 bags that contained pre-made joints, looking for any that may draw my attention, also picking up everything I spilled as I did so. The contents of 2 of the 8 compartments had almost completely spilled out. One of the near-empty sections had 2 joints in another Ziploc bag that caught my eye, revealed only after spilling everything that happened to be sitting on top. Some of the herbs inside them had a dark blue hue about them. My favorite color is blue, I thought to myself before pulling one out of the bag, making my decision like a child choosing his favorite toy or candy. I held the joint in one hand, putting the box away with the other. Grabbing the lighter and ashtray from Zeke's nightstand, I walked back to my bedroom. I opened my bedroom window to air out the weed that was about to stink up my room. After lighting it, I immediately noticed I did not smell like normal weed. I still held it up to my lips and inhaled a few times. My lungs burned. I started coughing, choking, also because of the smell the smoke produced. It smelled like weed, but also burnt plastic, specifically like a shoe store that caught fire. The taste wasn't half bad. It was a little sweet. Holy shit, I said, trying to fan out the smoke with my other hand. I stuck my head out the window before taking another huff. What are you doing? I thought to myself before walking to the ashtray and putting it out. I continued coughing for a few minutes before turning off the lights and laying back in bed. The smell was still prevalent, but I was starting to feel very relaxed, very mellow and at peace with myself. I'm not sure when I fell asleep. I only noticed I passed out when something woke me up. A moist sensation ran up my arm. I assumed it was Vigo licking my arm and upper hand. Licking was a habit he developed in his old age. It was a means to let me know he needed to go outside to relieve himself. He did this almost every night. I pet his head, not yet fully aware that I was touching my alive, again, dead dog. "Do you need to go outside, boy?" I said to him before opening my eyes. I then registered what was going on and jolted out of my bed and turned on the lights. The room now illuminated and revealed that it was my dog, only he looked different. I was shocked. Vigo looked at me happily, using his whole body to wag his tail, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Vigo? Hey boy, what are you doing here?" I said, slowly getting closer and kneeling down to pet him. He was as happy as can be, leaning up against me and jumping around while I rubbed and patted his back. From up close, I could see his coat had a darker hue and more shine to it. This was my dog, just younger somehow. I held his head up to mine and saw the fur on his face was back to brown and black. His last couple years, I had given him the nickname Little Ghost Face, due to the white hairs that accumulated on his head. He really did look like he was wearing a mask. I estimated this was the Vigo from about 5 years ago. My dog was back in his prime, both happy and healthy. After playing with him for a while, I looked around, trying to find anything else that seemed off, out of place, or odd. I had to be dreaming, but everything felt so real. I looked out the window and saw that it was still completely dark out. The clock on my nightstand read that it was 2:20 a.m. I'd only slept for 15 minutes at most. It felt like I had been out for hours. "Where did you come from, buddy?" I then asked, looking at him attentively. Vigo acted like his normal younger self for a few minutes, before walking over to my closed bedroom door and scratching at it. "What is it? You actually want to go outside?" I asked him. He continued scratching at the door before excitedly letting out a high-pitched screech that, well, it answered my question. I walked over and opened the bedroom door. Vigo took off towards the living room. I assumed he was waiting by the door, but through the darkness I could see he was on his hind legs, leaning his front paws on someone who was sitting on the sofa. I then turned the lights on and instantly saw it wasn't Zeke. This person was facing away from me and towards the TV. The back of their head was shaved and they had big hoop-like earrings. "Hello," I said. "Who are you?" No response was garnered from the mysterious figure who was steadily petting my dog. Vigo was very happy to see this person. It was obvious he knew her, and I had no idea how.
Oddly enough, I wasn't afraid and proceeded to walk towards him, talking and asking more questions as I got closer. I've never seen you before. Are you Zeke's friend or something? I asked, walking over and around the sofa. My dog looked at me and wagged his tail when I got near. From up close, I could tell it was a woman, with a completely shaved head dressed in strange garments. She had a loose-fitting tan dress that almost matched her skin tone. It looked like it was torn to shreds, with many threads and pieces of the dress hanging off all over. She didn't look homeless. What she wore looked ancient, like something an old civilization once wore. The lady gave me a soothing sense of calmness. Her gold earrings glowed with a minimal amount of light. The ceiling bulbs produced. She smiled at me, or at least she would have if she had a face. She looked somehow familiar. There was a void where her face should have been. Yet she looked like someone I had seen before. There was a protruding portion in the middle of her face that looked to be a snout. Despite having almost no facial features and not saying a single word, she seemed to convey exactly what she was here for. I knelt down when my dog came back to me after having been on her lap. Vigo spun and jumped at me excitedly, almost pushing me against the wall. I got up, and he did the same. Standing on his back legs, he stretched his body up against mine. He held his head up and looked at me. I hunched to be face to face with him, petting him while he stood. He seemed to calm down for a second. I'm not sure how I knew, but this was it. His farewell. He gave me one last happy scratch and licked my face. Clearly told to do so, Vigo jumped off me before the mysterious lady stood up. She then faced my way and nodded her head once. I respectfully did the same. The lady never took a single step. She seemingly just hovered over the front door and went straight through it. My dog followed her up to the door and waited. Looking over to me, Vigo wanted me to open the door for him. I walked over and unlocked and opened the door. What I saw was beautiful. It was some kind of vehicle, glistening and shining just like her earrings. She was inside waiting for my dog. Vigo ran over to it, whatever it was. He looked over to me for a brief moment and then stepped inside. I could still see them sitting within, though through what I can only describe as windows. The whole thing seemed to shine even brighter for a brief moment, and then suddenly began to move forward. It wasn't until they had begun to move that I saw they had a third passenger. It seemed to be another canine. It looked out towards me from the back window, and I immediately recognized him. That was my childhood dog. He passed away when I was 5. It was Cooper. His curly white fur and eraser pink nose were unmistakable. I smiled, for in that moment I felt truly happy. My girl woke me up the next morning, asking me why the front door was unlocked, what had been burning, and why I was sleeping on the living room couch. I looked around myself while I still sat on the couch. Had that really happened? I asked myself. Emily found the joint in my room. There was no point in lying to her about having smoked something besides weed, which she was very obviously against. It didn't take a regular smoker to know what I had smoked was something else. She opened it all at the windows in our apartment to air out the smell. About me sleeping on the couch, I told her it had gotten hot in my room after smoking, so I walked down to get some fresh air. I told her I had forgotten to lock the door before sitting on the couch and falling asleep. Zeke had crashed at a friend's house that night and got home after noon. Emily reprimanded him and demanded to know exactly what I had smoked that night. He laughed when he saw the bag. It still had the other joint in it and said it was changa. Neither of us knew exactly what that meant. Emily looked it up and asked me if I had any hallucinations. I lied, of course, and noticed Zeke looked at me with a slight grin. He knew I was lying. I never told her what I saw that night, but I know it did me good and gave me closure. Emily was obviously upset at Zeke, but she and I actually had a good weekend. I eventually told Zeke what I saw. He was intrigued, especially because of the herb blend, also contained a high amount of blue lotus. "Never go digging around in my stash again. If you want some weed, I'll give it to you personally," he said, before reiterating that there are positives and negatives to taking most drugs and hallucinogenics. They have their place in moderation, I remember he said in standard Zeke fashion. That was a few weeks ago, and I thought about what I had hallucinated fondly up until yesterday. I accompanied Emily to the funeral and burial of our dear Aunt Angela. Emily has a big family, and the funeral home was packed. I looked around, surprised at the amount of people that had showed up. It didn't take me long to notice it. I saw a similar entity among the crowd, more humanoid with no snout and of male composition. He moved past everyone, his tone and shredded robe flowing in non-existent wind, no longer under the influence. This time I was afraid. The specter stood by her casket. His ancient bracelet seemed to illuminate his surroundings. His faceless form looked at me no matter where I moved. It took me everything to stay calm. He was also present during her burial. He showed up riding one of those things. There were other occupants. I recognized a few of them from an old photo album of Emily's family. Angela was present during her own funeral. None of her relatives could see. Only I. She smiled at me. I then saw her walk over to the glistening craft. I saw her hop on board, and I saw him take her away. That is the end of today's video. If you enjoyed, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.